Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Saskia Rietbroek. I'm with the Association of Certified Sanctions Specialists. And this month we have another video for you with the top 5 sanctions developments that happened in January 2021. Let the countdown begin. We start with 2 OFFAC enforcement actions. On January 4 and 14 respectively, OFFAC, the US Sanctions Agency, announced a settlement against a French bank and an Indonesian paper company. The bank paid $8 million in penalty and the paper company just over $1 million for violation of US sanctions. Let me explain a little bit. The French bank that got fined was the Union de Banque Arabe et Française, UBAF. And this bank facilitated trade finance between Europe, Middle East, Africa and Asia, among others. And UBAF had US dollar accounts for sanctioned Syrian financial institutions, indirectly conducted US dollar business on behalf of these institutions through the financial system. As many other enforcement actions have shown, it's really dangerous to maintain accounts for entities located in countries or jurisdictions subject to comprehensive sanctions, like the sanctions against Syria. And financial institutions should really assess the sanctions risk that they may face by continuing to provide these services. The other company that got fined was the Indonesian paper company, BMJ from Indonesia. So this company makes paper on the island of Java. And among the paper that they make is paper for cigarettes. So what got them in trouble? BMJ, they exported cigarette paper to North Korea, not directly, but through an intermediary in China. And this intermediary procured this paper on behalf of an OFFAC designated SDN, a specially designated national, some company on the blacklist, Daesung, a trading company that was designated by the US about 10 years ago. And it's part of a network that provides support to the North Korean leadership in getting them access to luxury things, like foreign branded cigarettes. Here you see Kim Jong, who according to press reports is a chain smoker. And similar to the French bank case, this case also involved payments in US dollars that got this Indonesian company in trouble with OFFAC, because that's enough for OFFAC to have jurisdiction. On number 4, 5 days before the inauguration of Biden, the Trump administration delivered a final blow to the Chinese technology industry. And the Department of Defense placed another 9 companies, aviation company, technology companies, semiconductor companies, on the so-called communist Chinese military company list. This is another list that really causes a lot of headaches for companies doing business in China. And the US government accuses the companies on this list for having military ties to the Chinese military. And it tries to avoid with these sanctions that these companies receive investments. And this military list is different from the Commerce Department's so-called entity list, which you may have heard about, which banned Huawei and several other Chinese firms from dealing with US suppliers. The military list prohibits US companies and individuals from making investments, buying securities in these companies. And there are now 2 licenses that have been issued with different wind-down periods and a couple of FAQs, frequently asked questions, issued by OFFAC to help compliance efforts. Some of these Chinese telecom companies are on the New York Stock Exchange. And at the end of last month in December, the New York Stock Exchange actually said that it was going to delist them from the stock exchange. But this didn't happen. In January, when these licenses were issued, that extended the period for investors, giving them more time to wind down the transactions with these companies. The New York Stock Exchange decided not to take them off delist them. So what are the Chinese companies doing about it? Are they sitting back? No, actually one of them, Xiaomi, I hope I pronounced this well, probably butchered it, a Chinese smartphone maker, sued the US government and is trying to get off the list. In reality, I think this company may not be affected immediately by these sanctions because it's not listed on the New York Stock Exchange, but it is listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and its stock dropped 10% when they were placed on the military list. And of course, it will impact them later when they try to raise capital in a new round. In any case, the going back and forth between the New York Stock Exchange and OFFAC about these sanctions underscores the lack of clarity and the tensions around the implementation of these sanctions and how it affects investments in these Chinese companies. I guess if the lawyers of the New York Stock Exchange have trouble understanding what can and what cannot be done, how can a compliance officer in maybe a smaller company dealing with them deal with that? So it's really not easy. On number 3, we have sanctions and counter-sanctions. On January 20, the day of the inauguration of President Biden, China announced sanctions against several former government officials in the US under the Trump administration. They include former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and other individuals such as national security advisors, the ex-health secretary, the former UN ambassador Kelly Craft, and other former Trump aides. So these individuals, according to these Chinese sanctions issued by China, these individuals and their immediate family members are prohibited from entering mainland China, entering Hong Kong, entering Macau, and they and the companies and institutions associated with them are also restricted from doing business with China. According to press reports, Pompeo has said that Chinese sanctions against the Uyghurs and the Muslim minority in the Xinjiang region in northwestern China were genocide and a crime against humanity. And a Chinese spokesperson has said that he was lying. So this is why they imposed these sanctions on them. Well, the US has, of course, many sanctions against China, and several of them are related to human rights violations in this region. And not just the US says this, but there's United Nations reports with evidence that the people living in that area, the Muslims, have been detained in camps. And China denies these human rights violations in this region. In January, on the 19th, the European Commission, and this is number 2 on our list, presented a new strategy to stimulate the openness, resilience, and strength of the EU economic and financial system. The document is really about strengthening of the euro and its financial market infrastructure, but it also includes several action points regarding EU's own sanctions. In fact, the document has 15 action points, and 5 of them are related to sanctions, and I will mention a couple. The first one, in 2021, the EU, according to this action point, wants to develop a database, a sanctions information exchange repository for reporting and exchange of information between the member states and the Commission on the implementation and enforcement of EU sanctions. The second action point that stood out to me was that the Commission will work with the member states to establish a single contact point for enforcement and implementation issues, which may have cross-border dimension. And I think that could, maybe be like an OFFAC similar type of vehicle. I don't know. That may be too ambitious. But another action point is that the Commission will set up a dedicated system to allow for anonymous reporting of sanctions evasion, including whistleblowing. I actually have good hopes that these action points will happen, will take place. 2 years ago, I would have my doubts. But since about a year, the department responsible for overseeing EU sanctions policy has been relocated to DG FISMA. And this is a directorate dealing with the financial sector with a lot more resources than the other one. So with more resources, the EU will manage to do a lot more on the topic of sanctions than they used to. So I think the move to DG FISMA has really changed things. And the sanctions imposed by the EU will be enforced better, I think, in particular throughout its financial system. And these plans are now on paper as action points mentioned in this strategy report. So on number 1, we have a new president in the United States. On January 20, President Biden took office, and it's a little bit too early to tell what he will do, but one area in which the Treasury may act quickly is on sanctions. For instance, on the Yemen sanctions, Biden already took action. President Trump, just before he left office, had declared the Houthis a terrorist group. And this move was criticized by the UN and relief organizations because the Houthi group is the de facto authority in northern Yemen, and the aid agencies have to work with this group to deliver humanitarian aid. So if you put sanctions on them, you can no longer do that, and that will affect civilians in the war there. On the other sanctions regimes, we have to wait and see. Biden has said that he favors tightening sanctions against Russia, so that may be among OFFAC's first actions of the new administration. And OFFAC will likely reevaluate President Trump's many sanctions against Iran, but there's an election coming up in that country, so we may have to wait and see. And further, I don't think he will unwind sanctions against China, especially because many of them are related to human rights violations. So that was it for this month. Please visit www.sanctionsassociation.org for information about training and certification on the topic of sanctions. Thank you so much, and see you next month.